Hello students and welcome back. We are now going to talk about chapters 10 and 11 in our textbook. It is indeed module number 6 of 8. We are getting there. We're making headway through the course. Chapter 10 is about decision making. And when you are faced with two or more choices in a decision, how to understand which considerations are relevant and which are not. Now, in order to review this, I'd like to ask you to flip to section 10.1 and then go to the second problem set called Your Turn. So there are multiple problem sets called Your Turn in section 10.1. Go to the second one. It's entitled Costs and Revenues at Carolina Clusters. Basically, the company is facing a decision. Do I hire one full-time worker or multiple part-time workers? To begin with, if you look down at the solution, there are 4 issues regarding costs that are relevant. The first, you'd have to pay some benefits to the full-timer. You would not have to pay any benefits for the part-timer, so the cost of benefits is relevant. You need to take it into consideration prior to making a decision. Second, if you hire 2 part-timers as opposed to 1 full-timer, you need to buy twice as many t-shirts for your staff. Now, please note, if you hire 1 full-timer, you pay $16. 2 part-timers instead, $32. Now, in a way, conceptually, you might say, well, obviously, the cost of t-shirts is relevant. However, the way that the book defines relevancy, it's only the marginal or additional cost that is relevant. In other words, what the book is saying is, look, at the very minimum, you need to spend $16 if you're buying t-shirts for 1 full-time employee. And so if you opt for 2 part-timers, although you are going to spend $32 for their t-shirts in total, if you would have spent $16 for t-shirts anyway, it's only the additional $16 that you would need to spend for the extra t-shirts that make a difference to your decision and that therefore are relevant to the decision. And it's that logic that also applies to the cost of hair coverings. That hair covering expenditure is relevant because you would pay a different amount depending on whether you hire 1 full-timer or 2 part-timers. However, the way that the book defines the relevant cost, it's only the marginal or additional amount that you would spend for the 2 part-timers that is relevant above and beyond what you would have spent anyway if you were to hire the full-time employee instead. And the same essentially applies to the cost of gloves. It's the additional or incremental cost that you would pay instead. There is a little bit of a wrinkle, though, in the idea of having to pay more for t-shirts, hair coverings, or gloves for 2 employees as opposed to 1. Let me read to you one line in the example, in the problem itself, I should say. The line that I'm focused on is, each employee uses, on average, 6 sets of gloves every 8 hours, or 4 sets of gloves every 4 hours. Now that's strange, because if you need 4 sets of gloves every 4 hours, you would think you would need 8 sets of gloves every 8 hours, and yet you don't. Why? It doesn't say. And I'm not sure that I can explain that. It's simply an assumption that is given. Such quirks often appear throughout the business world, and you do need to be careful to account for them when you decide which additional or marginal costs are in fact relevant to your decision. Now, going back to the solution, there are no relevant revenues in the problem. What would a relevant revenue item be, potentially? Well, let's say you have reason to believe that a full-time employee would be so grateful for the benefits that they would go out of their way to encourage their friends and family members to come do business, to buy stuff at the store. If that's the case, then you might conclude that a full-time employee might actually bring in business revenues that part-timers would simply not be motivated to bring in. That would be a relevant revenue factor, but there are none given here. Sunk costs. This is a toughie. No, not a taffy as in taffy machine, but a toughie, a tough one. It turns out that you just spent $27,000 for a taffy machine. And if you continue to use that original taffy machine, it could influence your decision about whom to hire. In reality, however, whether you hire the full-time employee or the part-time employee in this example, the $27,000 is already spent. It's history. It's money that is gone. Nothing will ever bring it back. And as a result, we refer to it as a sunk cost because you've already sunk your money into the machine, and if you can't get the money back, you should just not worry about that money when you make your decision. Sunk costs are usually considered to be not relevant because the money's gone. But you do need to be a little bit careful before you simply say any money already spent is not relevant. Because sometimes a full-time employee might actually be better motivated to learn how to operate a complicated set of equipment more efficiently. And so, even though a sunk cost is usually not relevant, if it can influence the extent to which one group of employees might work more efficiently than the other, then it might have some type of influence over a factor that is relevant to the decision. Finally, there are no opportunity costs in this example. What would an opportunity cost be? Well, let's say that if you were to hire a full-time worker, and if business is very slow, then you would be stuck having to pay the worker anyway. Let's assume, again, that if you were to hire part-time workers, and if business was very slow, let's assume for the moment that you could tell the part-time workers, don't come into work today and I won't pay you, or go home and I will stop paying you the moment you leave for home. In other words, you might be able to shut down your store, send your workers home, or perhaps even tell your part-time workers, hey, I have a business across the street. It's not Caroline Clusters. It's a different business. But if you are only a part-time worker working by the hour, I might have an opportunity to use you elsewhere, an opportunity and a flexibility that is not available for a full-time worker. Anytime making one decision deprives you of an opportunity to potentially do something else, that lost flexibility, that lost alternative opportunity is a valid consideration. It is a relevant consideration, a relevant issue in any such decision. For the remainder of this chapter, the textbook authors walk you through different decisions, and you constantly need to have to go through each of the given facts in the fact pattern and decide what is relevant, what is not. What we have learned here in this your turn problem is, number one, as for relevant costs, it's only what you would pay above and beyond what you would pay under the alternative choice that is relevant. Number two, look for relevant revenue opportunities and opportunity cost situations, even though you often don't find them, which is the case here. And then finally, any monies that you have spent that you cannot get back are sunk costs, and therefore they are not relevant to the decision unless they happen to impact the way that you operate going forward. Okay, well that's chapter 10. I also want to briefly take you to chapter 11. And in order to do so, I'd like to ask you to go to section 11.3. Okay, that's 11.3. And then scroll down to the subtitle or subsection entitled Compounding. Compounding. You're probably already familiar with this, so I will only spend a brief amount of time on it, but it is worth remembering as you go through this chapter. In this example, and it's the first little table of that subsection called compounding, they show you a situation where you are investing $10,000 and you are earning 10% interest per year. And you just keep the interest in the bank account and you basically roll the entire balance forward. It would be a mistake to say, well, if I'm investing $10,000 and if I'm earning 10% a year, then I guess my interest income is $1,000 a year. Why? Because after the first year, if you just keep rolling the balance forward, you start to earn interest on your interest, as well as on the original $10,000. Look at this first table underneath the title of the section Compounding. In year 0, you make your $10,000 investment. After 1 year, it grows 10% to $11,000. But the following year, you're not earning 10% interest on $10,000. You're earning 10% interest on $11,000. Your total interest income in that second year is not $1,000, it's $1,100. And at the end of the second year, you don't just have $12,000 in the bank, you have $12,100. And I'll just take it one more year with you. In the third year, you are earning 10%, not of the original $10,000, not of even $11,000. You are now earning 10% interest on $12,100. And so your money grows at the end of the third year, not just to $13,000 or some slightly higher amount, you're all the way up to $13,310 at the end of the third year. In other words, you're earning, by your third year, interest on top of interest on top of interest. That is the significant power of compounding. And that is why, as you begin to save for retirement or other major expenditures in your life, you do want to get serious about saving as early in your life as possible, so that the power of compounding can accrue to your benefit. That was just a side comment. I hope you find it helpful, not just to understand the chapter, but also to understand the importance of thinking about starting to save your money right now. Well, I hope you have found this helpful. Next week, we will cover in our voice recording the final 2 chapters of the textbook, chapters 12 and 13. I look forward to doing that with you in the next module.